What is good, everybody? Thank you so much for joining me once again, and today we're going to be talking about the newest Canon R5 firmware update, which is 1.3. It was just released a couple weeks back, and it's a pretty big difference. It's actually pretty surprising to see Canon release such a big firmware update. That wasn't just like a minor tweak, like it had a lot of things added to it. And today we're talking about three, not all of them, just three of my favorite things in this new Canon R5 1.3 firmware update. Let's get into this, folks. So to kick things off, let's get into one of my most intriguing, most interesting features that they threw into the Canon firmware 1.3, and that is the Canon RAW Light. Now, after doing a little bit of research, I realized that is not the same as the Cinema RAW Light, which is the light version of their RAW format for their cinema cameras. And I've had the pleasure of working with Cinema RAW Light files. They're not that bad file size, and my MacBook can actually handle them fairly well. I wouldn't say it's a perfect experience, but it's not a bad one at all, and it's pretty doable. Now, is the new R5 Lite file sizes smaller? For sure. They're actually a ton smaller. So on a 256 gigabyte card, you can expect about 13 minutes of just pure 8K raw beefiness. Now, if you take that 256 gigabyte card, except you record in the 8K raw light, you're getting now 25 minutes. So your files have shrunk by probably half as much, and you're getting twice as much on the same memory card, which is wonderful. And then you're still getting the juiciness of the raw footage. Now, is it easier to work with? Unfortunately not. I did a simple test where I recorded 10 seconds of a RAW file and then 10 seconds of a RAW Light file and just dragged them into a 4K timeline. I just wanted to see how fast my MacBook would be able to render it straight off the bat going first time into the timeline. The 8K RAW took about 1 minute and 7 seconds, and the 10-second 8K RAW Light took about 1 minute and 7 seconds. So unfortunately, on the performance level, you're not getting a much big of a difference, but on the file size level, you're getting about twice as much space, which is so awesome. And it makes the 8K RAW a little bit more doable to work with. So jumping into the second feature that I'd like to cover, which is the Canon CLog 3. Now, out of all the features, this is probably my favorite one. It's actually something that I've been experimenting with or working with over the last week that this has been out, and it's been such a pleasure. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I did not do any technical testing on this feature. However, Canon does claim that their CLog 3 sports about 1600% of dynamic range, which is about 14 stops. Now, the native ISO for that is 800. And like I said, I didn't do any technical tests, but however, comparing that with CLog 1, which comes native on the R5, and the EOS R, it is a huge difference. The highlight roll off, the highlight retention is a massive difference, and what you're getting in the shadows and in the highlights all in one image is just beautiful. And what you'll see here is a shot with just CLog 1, and then I've also taken a couple shots in CLog 3 for you guys to be able to see the difference in those log profiles. Now, as I've mentioned before, the native ISO for that is 800. So be prepared to keep your ISO up at 800, which means you're going to have to compensate with either ND filters, bumping the f-stop. It's going to be a little bit of a different workflow than what you're used to using CLog 1. But also on top of that, I would highly recommend, if you're planning to use CLog 3, make sure you toggle the histogram on your screen, because just using the LCD on the Canon R5 with CLog 3 is actually quite a bit misleading. You will screw up your exposure if you're not using the histogram. The histogram will give you a very clear and accurate representation as to what's going on in your highlights, in your shadows, or what are you crushing, maybe what you're overexposing, and it's going to give you a very realistic representation of your image. That way you can actually get the most out of your CLog 3. So last but not least, I wanted to touch up on the other file codecs that Canon released with this firmware update. So not only did the Canon RAW Light be released, but they also released an IPB Lite version of their 4K and their 8K, which actually made a really significant difference, not only on size-wise, but also processing-wise for my MacBook. So if you take the 8K and you're shooting all I, you're getting about 26 minutes on a 256 gigabyte card. Now, if you take that same 8K but shoot in IPB Lite, this new format, you're getting about 2 hours and 28 minutes on a 256 gigabyte card. That's a massive difference. It becomes a lot more practical to utilize the 8K, and you're still getting that juicy 8K resolution, but at literally a fraction of the file size. Like, it's pretty incredible. Now, it's not just for the 8K resolution that you get this IPB Lite, you're also getting this for the 4K and the 4K HQ. If you want to take advantage of the HQ sharpness but want to kind of dial down on the file sizes, well, there's an IPB Lite now, and it's significantly smaller as well. Now, even though I'm not desperate for significantly smaller file sizes, what I will say though is that I can see how this is practical for if you really want to get the most out of maybe shooting long form content on 4K HQ, wedding ceremonies, podcasts, maybe interviews. This is a great way to save your space, but you're still getting that little bit of bump in sharpness. So I took the 8K All I and 8K IPB Lite, got a 10-second shot of each just to see how my MacBook would handle that running Final Cut Pro X. Now, I'm very happy to say that using All I, that 10-second shot took about 1 minute and 8 seconds to render, just being dropped into a 4K timeline. Taking that 8K IPB Lite version, throwing that into my timeline, what I noticed is that it took 48 seconds. You're saving 20 seconds just by shooting in a smaller 8K codec. Now that's phenomenal. Think about 20 seconds. Now take that apart, you know, over 100 clips that you may have, it starts to add up and rake up over time. Now the perks are evident. You got smaller file sizes, which means you can pack more into your existing memory card, but then also now your editing is actually getting faster in post-production, which is wonderful. Now, is your image getting any worse with those smaller file sizes? Well, I honestly don't know if my eyes were just playing tricks on me. I don't know how to actually test this, but just from looking at some of the clips that I got, I felt like the All I was just a hair sharper, noticeable, but I don't know, honestly, after exporting this and uploading this to YouTube, if you're even going to be able to tell the difference between the two. Well, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today and talking about the Canon R5 firmware. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Do you have similar experiences? The comment section below is for us to have a conversation, so drop your thoughts, your questions. I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.